The crisp mountain air, scented with pine and damp earth, filled the lungs of Alara and Ben as they ascended the winding trail. Sunlight dappled through the canopy of leaves, painting shifting patterns on the forest floor. Alara, ever the enthusiastic hiker, pointed out a vibrant patch of wildflowers clinging to a rocky outcrop. Ben, more reserved, nodded, his gaze sweeping the surrounding woods, a subtle awareness of their isolation in his eyes. They had been walking for several hours, enjoying the quiet companionship and the challenge of the climb. Their destination was a secluded waterfall, a hidden gem whispered about by local hikers. Further down the same trail, a small boy named Elio, no older than 5, trailed slightly behind his parents. His bright red jacket was a stark contrast to the muted greens and browns of the forest. Leo was captivated by a fluttering butterfly, its wings a delicate mosaic of orange and black. He took a few tentative steps off the path, his small hand outstretched, his attention solely focused on the insect's erratic flight. His parents, engrossed in conversation, didn't notice their son's momentary deviation. The butterfly danced further into the trees and Leo, without realizing it, followed. The sounds of his parents' voices began to fade, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the chirping of unseen birds. The butterfly finally disappeared into a thicket of ferns, and Leo looked up, his brow furrowing slightly. The familiar sight of the trail was gone. The trees all looked the same. A small seed of unease began to sprout in his young heart. Alara and Ben reached a small clearing, the sunlight bathing the moss-covered rocks in a warm glow. They paused to catch their breath and consult their map. Ben pointed to a faint line indicating a turnoff that would lead them to the waterfall. Alara, reaching for her water bottle, noticed a flash of red deeper in the woods. "Did you see that?" she asked, her eyes narrowed. Ben followed her gaze but saw nothing distinct. "Just the leaves, I think," he replied. Leo, now thoroughly lost, called out for his parents, his small voice thin and reedy against the vastness of the forest. Panic began to tighten its grip. He hugged himself, his red jacket suddenly feeling inadequate against the growing chill of the woods. Tears welled in his eyes, blurring the already confusing landscape. He started to walk, hoping to stumble back onto the path, but each step seemed to take him further into the dense undergrowth. As Alara and Ben continued along the main trail, a flicker of movement caught Alara's eye again. This time it was closer, a small brown rabbit darting across their path and disappearing into the underbrush on the left side of the trail. "That rabbit seemed insistent," Alara commented, a strange feeling stirring within her. Ben chuckled. "Probably just startled by us." They continued on their way, the image of the fleeting red jacket and the darting rabbit lingering in Alara's mind. Leo, his legs scratched and his cheeks wet with tears, sank down at the base of a large oak tree. He felt utterly alone. The forest, which had seemed so magical moments ago, now felt menacing and vast. He wished for his parents, for the comfort of their familiar voices and warm embrace. He closed his eyes, a sob escaping his lips. The rabbit reappeared on the trail ahead of Alara and Ben. This time it didn't simply cross. It paused, its nose twitching, looking directly at them before hopping a few feet down a less defined side trail and stopping again as if waiting. Alara stopped, a growing sense of unease mixed with a strange curiosity. "Ben, look at that," she said, pointing. Ben followed the rabbit's movements, a skeptical expression on his face. "It's just a rabbit, Alara. Probably has a burrow over there." But the rabbit's behavior was unusual. It didn't flee as they approached. Instead, it hopped further down the side trail, stopping every few feet and looking back at them, its ears perked. Alara felt a pull, an inexplicable feeling that the rabbit was trying to lead them somewhere. "I have a bad feeling, Ben," she said, her voice serious. "That flash of red I saw earlier, and now this rabbit. Something doesn't feel right." Ben hesitated. They were on a tight schedule if they wanted to reach the waterfall and return before nightfall. Taking an unmarked side trail could lead them anywhere or nowhere. But the earnestness in Alara's eyes, combined with the rabbit's persistent behavior, gave him pause. "All right," he conceded, "but let's just go a little way. If it leads nowhere, we turn back." The rabbit seemed to sense their decision. It hopped further down the narrow, overgrown path, its white tail bobbing like a beacon. Ilara and Ben followed, pushing aside branches and stepping over fallen logs. The side trail was rough and uneven, a stark contrast to the well-maintained main path. Ben kept glancing at his watch, a hint of impatience in his movements. Leo, startled by a rustling in the undergrowth, opened his eyes. He saw a small brown rabbit emerge from the bushes. It looked at him for a moment, its dark eyes wide and still, before hopping a short distance away and stopping, as if inviting him to follow. Leo, his fear momentarily forgotten in his curiosity, watched the rabbit. Ilara and Ben continued to follow their unlikely guide. The rabbit moved with a purpose, never straying far from the faint trail, always looking back to ensure they were still behind it. The forest grew denser, the sunlight struggling to penetrate the thick canopy. The air felt cooler, and a sense of urgency began to build within Ilara. Leo, drawn by the rabbit's gentle movements, slowly got to his feet. He took a tentative step towards it. The rabbit hopped again, a little further this time, still looking back. A flicker of hope ignited in Leo's small chest. Maybe this rabbit knew the way back to his parents. He took another step and then another, following the small creature deeper into the woods. The side trail began to descend, becoming steeper and more treacherous. Ilara stumbled on a loose rock and Ben reached out to steady her. "Are you sure about this, Ilara?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "This doesn't feel right. We should turn back." "Just a little further, Ben," Ilara pleaded, her eyes fixed on the bobbing white tail ahead. "I have a feeling, a strong feeling." She couldn't explain it, but the urgency she felt was undeniable. It was as if an invisible thread connected her to whatever the rabbit was leading them to. Leo continued to follow the rabbit, his small legs growing tired, but his determination fueled by a fragile hope. The rabbit led him through patches of sunlight and shadow, around thick tree trunks and over mossy stones. It never went too fast, always staying within his sight, a silent promise of guidance. Suddenly the rabbit stopped at the edge of a small ravine. It looked back at Ilara and Ben, its ears twitching, and then disappeared over the edge. Ilara and Ben exchanged worried glances. The ravine looked steep and dangerous. "Now what?" Ben asked, his skepticism returning. But then they heard it, a faint, muffled sound, a child's cry carried on the still air. Ilara's heart leaped. "Leo," she whispered, recognizing the name she had overheard his parents calling out earlier on the main trail. The red jacket she had glimpsed flashed in her mind. They carefully made their way to the edge of the ravine and peered down. There, nestled amongst the ferns at the bottom, was a small boy in a bright red jacket. He was huddled against the base of a tree, his face streaked with tears. And nearby, nibbling on a patch of clover, was the brown rabbit. "Leo," Ilara called out, her voice filled with relief. The boy looked up, his eyes widening in surprise and then flooding with relief. "Mommy? Daddy?" he cried, his voice hoarse. Ilara and Ben carefully made their way down the steep embankment, their earlier frustrations forgotten. They reached Leo, who immediately threw his arms around Ilara, burying his face in her jacket. Ben checked him for injuries, finding only a few scrapes and bruises. As they comforted the shaken boy, his parents' frantic voices echoed through the trees. They had retraced their steps, their panic growing with each passing moment. Ilara called out, and within minutes, Leo's distraught parents burst through the undergrowth, their faces etched with worry. The reunion was emotional, filled with tears of relief and heartfelt gratitude. Leo's mother hugged him tightly, her body trembling. His father clasped Ilara and Ben's hands, his words choked with emotion. "We don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice thick. "You've saved our son." Ilara smiled, her gaze drifting towards the small brown rabbit, which was now calmly grooming its fur nearby. It looked up at her for a brief moment as if acknowledging her, before disappearing back into the undergrowth. "It was the rabbit," Ilara said softly, a sense of wonder in her voice. "It led us to him." Leo's parents looked at her, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and awe. They hadn't seen the rabbit. As they made their way back to the main trail, Leo nestled safely between his parents, occasionally glancing back at the spot where he had been found. Ilara and Ben walked behind them, a shared sense of profound satisfaction settling over them. They had set out for a leisurely hike to a waterfall, but they had stumbled upon something far more significant. The rabbit, their unlikely guide, had vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared. They would never know why it had acted as it did, why it had chosen to lead them to a lost and frightened child. Perhaps it was a coincidence, a series of fortunate events. Or perhaps, as Ilara couldn't help but believe, there was something more to it, a touch of magic in the wild heart of the forest. They reached the main trail and began the walk back, the setting sun casting long shadows through the trees. The air still held the scent of pine and damp earth, but now it was mingled with the warmth of human connection and the quiet understanding of an extraordinary encounter. The waterfall could wait. They had found something far more precious. The story of the rabbit that led them to the lost child would stay with them, a reminder of the unexpected ways in which help can arrive, sometimes in the most unassuming of forms. It was a testament to the interconnectedness of all living things, a whisper of the wild's hidden wisdom. And as they descended the mountain, their hearts were full, not just from the physical exertion, but from the profound and humbling experience they had shared. The forest held its secrets close, but on this day, it had offered a glimpse of its gentle, guiding hand. On a crisp autumn morning, the dense woods of the Appalachian Trail were alive with the sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves. A group of seasoned hikers, accustomed to the challenges of the wilderness, embarked on their usual weekend trek. Among them was young Liam, a curious and adventurous boy, eager to prove his mettle on the trail. As the group ventured deeper into the forest, Liam, distracted by the beauty of a distant waterfall, lagged behind. The others, engrossed in conversation, failed to notice his absence until they reached their planned rest stop. Panic set in as they realized Liam was missing. Frantic calls echoed through the trees, but there was no response. The group retraced their steps, shouting his name, but the forest swallowed their voices. Hours passed, and the sun began its descent, casting long shadows over the trail. The hikers, now desperate, decided to split up and search the area more thoroughly. The forest, once serene, now felt ominous. The hikers, each with a sense of dread, scoured the underbrush and shouted Liam's name. The canopy above filtered the fading light, making visibility difficult. Despite their efforts, there was no sign of the boy. As nightfall approached, the temperature dropped, and the group regrouped at the rest stop. They debated their next move, knowing that delaying could be dangerous. One of the hikers, Sarah, suggested they contact local authorities. Reluctantly, they agreed, realizing the gravity of the situation. The following morning, a search party from the nearby town arrived, equipped with search dogs and experienced trackers. The group expanded and the search intensified. Hours turned into a day and still there was no sign of Liam. Just as hope began to wane, a peculiar sight caught the attention of one of the trackers. A rabbit, unusually large and with a distinctive white patch on its chest, appeared on the trail. It hopped a few feet ahead, then stopped and turned as if waiting for the group to follow. Intrigued, the tracker motioned for the others to follow. The rabbit led them down a narrow, overgrown path, its movements deliberate and purposeful. The group hesitated, unsure of the rabbit's intentions, but the urgency of the situation pushed them forward. The rabbit led the group through dense thickets and overgrown trails, areas they hadn't thought to search. After what seemed like an eternity, they arrived at a small, secluded hollow. There, nestled against a large oak tree, was Liam, unconscious but alive. His clothes were torn and his face was streaked with dirt, but he was breathing steadily. Relief washed over the group as they rushed to his side. One of the hikers, a nurse, checked his vitals and confirmed he was stable. The rabbit, having led them to the boy, sat at the edge of the hollow watching silently. As the group prepared to carry Liam back, the rabbit disappeared into the underbrush as mysteriously as it had appeared. With Liam safely in tow, the group made their way back to the main trail. The journey was slow, as they had to navigate the challenging terrain while ensuring Liam remained stable. The forest, once a source of anxiety, now felt like a guardian guiding them home. As they neared the trailhead, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the landscape. The hikers, exhausted but grateful, emerged from the woods, greeted by the concerned faces of their families and local authorities. Liam was immediately taken to a nearby hospital for a thorough examination. Doctors confirmed he had suffered from dehydration and exhaustion but was otherwise unharmed. His family, overwhelmed with relief, thanked the search party and the mysterious rabbit that had led them to their son. In the weeks that followed, the story of the rabbit that led hikers to a lost child spread throughout the town. Locals spoke of the creature as a guardian spirit of the forest, a silent protector watching over those who ventured into its depths. Some hikers claimed to have seen the rabbit in the days after the rescue, always appearing at the edge of the trail, watching silently. Others believed it had returned to its hidden hollow, waiting for the next time it was needed. The legend of the rabbit became a cherished tale, passed down through generations. It served as a reminder of the mysteries that still lingered in the wilderness and the unseen forces that guided and protected those who respected the land. Years later, Liam, now an adult, returned to the Appalachian Trail. He hiked the same path where he had been lost, reflecting on the events that had shaped his life. As he reached the secluded hollow, he paused, feeling a sense of peace and connection to the forest. He sat beneath the old oak tree, the place where the rabbit had led the search party to him. Closing his eyes, he listened to the sounds of the forest, the rustling leaves, the distant calls of birds, the whisper of the wind. In that moment he felt a presence, comforting and familiar. Opening his eyes, he saw a flash of white, a rabbit with a distinctive patch on its chest, watching him from the edge of the hollow. Smiling, Liam whispered, "Thank you." The rabbit, as if acknowledging his gratitude, turned and disappeared into the underbrush, leaving Liam with a sense of wonder and a renewed appreciation for the mysteries of the forest. The sun hung low over the dense forest, casting long shadows between the towering pines. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, carrying the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. Deep in the woods, a small child, no more than 6 years old, wandered away from a family picnic, drawn by the fluttering wings of a bright blue butterfly. Unaware of how far she had strayed, she soon found herself surrounded by unfamiliar trees, the sounds of her family's laughter fading into silence. As dusk approached, panic set in. The little girl, named Emma, called out for her parents, her voice trembling. But the forest swallowed her cries, leaving only the distant hoot of an owl in response. She curled up beneath a large oak tree, hugging her knees to her chest, tears streaming down her cheeks. The temperature dropped, and the once friendly woods now felt vast and frightening. Meanwhile, miles away, a group of hikers packed up their gear after a long day on the trails. Among them was Jake, an experienced outdoorsman with a sharp eye for detail. As they made their way back to the trailhead, something unusual caught his attention. A small, white rabbit darting across the path. It wasn't the rabbit itself that was strange, but its behavior. Instead of fleeing, it paused, staring directly at the hikers before hopping a few steps forward, then stopping again. Jake frowned. "That's odd, almost like it wants us to follow." The others laughed it off, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling. Against their protests, he trailed the rabbit, moving deeper into the woods. The animal led him through thick underbrush and across a shallow stream, always staying just within sight. The further they went, the stronger Jake's conviction grew. This wasn't random. The rabbit was guiding him somewhere. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of a child's whimper. Jake's heart raced as he pushed through a final cluster of bushes, emerging into a small clearing. There, beneath the oak tree, sat Emma, cold, scared, but unharmed. Relief flooded through him as he knelt beside her. "Hey there, sweetheart. You're safe now." Emma looked up, her eyes wide with hope. "You found me." The rabbit lingered at the edge of the clearing for just a moment longer before vanishing into the undergrowth. Jake would later wonder if he had imagined its strange intelligence, but one thing was certain. Without its guidance, they might never have found Emma in time. As the hikers carried the little girl back to her frantic parents, the forest seemed to sigh in relief. Somewhere among the trees, a white rabbit watched silently before turning away, its mysterious duty fulfilled. The sun hung low over the dense forest, casting long shadows between the towering pines. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, carrying the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. Birds chirped their evening songs, and the distant murmur of a creek added to the peaceful hum of the wilderness. Deep in the woods, a small child, no more than 6 years old, wandered away from a family picnic, drawn by the fluttering wings of a bright blue butterfly. Emma had always been a curious child, her imagination as vast as the forest itself. The butterfly danced just out of reach, its wings shimmering in the fading light. Laughing, she chased after it, her tiny feet crunching over twigs and leaves. Unaware of how far she had strayed, she soon found herself surrounded by unfamiliar trees, the sounds of her family's laughter fading into silence. At first she wasn't afraid. The woods were beautiful, moss-covered rocks, patches of sunlight filtering through the branches, the occasional rustle of a squirrel or chipmunk. But as the sky darkened, the forest changed. The friendly rustling became eerie whispers. The wind sounded like distant voices, and the shadows stretched longer, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. Emma stopped, her breath quickening. "Mommy?" she called out, her voice small against the vastness of the trees. No answer. She turned in a slow circle, her heart pounding. Nothing looked familiar. The picnic blanket, her parents, her older brother kicking a soccer ball, all of it was gone. Panic set in. She ran in one direction, then another, her sneakers slipping on wet leaves. Branches snagged at her clothes like grasping fingers. Tears blurred her vision as she stumbled over a root, landing hard on her hands and knees. A sob escaped her throat. She was lost. Truly terribly lost. Meanwhile, miles away, a group of hikers packed up their gear after a long day on the trails. They had spent hours trekking through the national park, mapping out new routes and documenting rare plant species. Among them was Jake, an experienced outdoorsman with a sharp eye for detail. He had spent years in these woods, knew their secrets, their dangers, and their strange, unexplained moments. As they made their way back to the trailhead, something unusual caught his attention. A small, white rabbit darting across the path. It wasn't the rabbit itself that was strange, but its behavior. Instead of fleeing, it paused, staring directly at the hikers before hopping a few steps forward, then stopping again. Jake frowned. "That's odd, almost like it wants us to follow." His friend Mark chuckled. "Yeah, right. Maybe it's leading us to a magic carrot patch." But Jake couldn't shake the feeling. There was something deliberate in the rabbit's movements, something almost intelligent. Against the other's protests, he trailed the animal, moving deeper into the woods. The rabbit led him through thick underbrush, across a shallow stream, always staying just within sight. The further they went, the stranger the forest felt. The air grew cooler, the light dimmer, as if they had stepped into another world. The trees here were ancient, their gnarled roots twisting like serpents from the earth. A faint mist curled around their ankles. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of a child's whimper. Jake's blood ran cold. He pushed through a final cluster of bushes, emerging into a small clearing. There, beneath the oak tree, sat Emma, cold, scared, but unharmed. Relief flooded through him as he knelt beside her. "Hey there, sweetheart. You're safe now." Emma looked up, her eyes wide with hope. "You found me." Jake wrapped his jacket around her trembling shoulders. "What's your name?" "Emma," she whispered. "How long have you been out here, Emma?" She sniffled. "Since the butterfly left." Jake glanced around, half expecting to see the white rabbit watching them. But it was gone. As the hikers carried Emma back to the trail, the forest seemed to sigh around them. The mist lifted, the air warmed, and the oppressive silence gave way to the familiar sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves. By the time they reached the ranger station, Emma's parents were already there, frantic with worry. The reunion was tearful, her mother clutching her tightly, her father shaking Jake's hand with trembling gratitude. "How did you find her?" he asked. Jake hesitated. He could hardly say, "A rabbit led me to her." Instead he simply smiled. "Just lucky, I guess." But later, as he sat by the campfire that night, he couldn't stop thinking about it. The way the rabbit had watched him. The way it had known. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the firelight, a pair of small, glowing eyes reflected the flames for just a moment, before disappearing into the night. The legend grows. In the weeks that followed, the story spread. A lost child, a miraculous rescue, and whispers of a mysterious white rabbit that had guided the hikers to her. Some dismissed it as coincidence. Others swore the woods were home to spirits, guardians of the lost. Emma's family never returned to that part of the forest. But sometimes when the wind was just right, Emma would pause, listening. And if she closed her eyes, she could almost hear the soft thump of rabbit feet, leading her home once more.